Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim, Chapter 18, The Air Ducts. And so it was. By teaching us how to read, they had taught us how to get away. Justin climbed easily up the open door of his cage and vanished over the top with a flick of his tail. He came back an hour later, greatly excited and full of information. Yet it was typical of Justin that even excited as he was, he stayed calm, though he thought clearly. He climbed down the front of my cage rather than his own, and spoke softly. We both assumed that by now the other rats were asleep. "Nicodemus, come on out. I'll show you how." He directed me as I reached through the wire bars of the door and felt beneath it. I found the small metal knob, slid it forward and sideward, and felt the door swing loose against my shoulder. I followed him up the side of the cage to the shelf above. There we stopped. It was the first time I had met Justin face to face. He said, "It's better talking here than around the partition." "Yes. Did you get down?" "Yes." "How did you get back up?" "At the end of this shelf there's a big cabinet. They keep the mouse cages in it. It has wire mesh doors. You can climb up and down like a ladder." "Of course," I said. "I remember now." I had seen that cabinet many times when my cage was carried past it. For some reason, perhaps, they were smaller. The mice were kept in cages within a cage. Justin said, "Nicodemus, I think I found the way out, to get out." "You have? How?" "At each end of the room there's an opening in the baseboard at the bottom of the wall. Air blows in through one of them and out the other. Each one has a metal grid covering it. And on the grid there's a sign that says, 'Lift to adjust airflow.' I lifted one of them. It hangs on hinges, like a trap door. Behind it there's a thing like a metal window, and when you slide it wide open, more air blows in. But the main thing is, it's easily big enough to walk through and get out." "But what's on the other side? Where does it lead?" "On the other side there's a duct, a thing like a square metal pipe built right into the wall. I walked along it, not very far, but I can figure out where it must go. There's bound to be a duct like it leading out of every room in the building, and they all must branch off one main central pipe. And that one has to lead somewhere, to the outside, because that's where our air comes from. That's why they never open the windows. I don't think those windows can open." He was right, of course. The building had central air conditioning. What we had to do was find the main air shaft and explore it. There would have to be an intake at one end and an outlet at the other. But that was easier said than done, and before it was done, there were questions to be answered. What about the rest of the rats? There were 20 of us in the laboratory, and we had to let the others know. So one by one, we woke them and showed them how to open their cages. It was an odd assembly at the gathering that night. Under the dimmed lights in the echoed library, on the shelf where Justin and I had talked, we all knew each other in a way, from the passing of messages over the preceding months. Yet, except for Jenner and me, none of us had really ever met. We were strangers, though, as you can imagine, it did not take long for us to develop a feeling of comradeship. For we 20 were alone in a strange world. Just how alone and how strange none of us really understood at first. Yet in a way, we sensed it from the beginning. The group looked to me as leader, probably because it was Justin and I who first set them free, and because Justin was obviously younger than I. We did not attempt to leave that night, but we went together and looked at the metal grid Justin had discovered and made plans for exploring the air ducts. Jenner was astute at that sort of things. He could foresee problems. "With a vent like this leading to every room," he said, "it will be easy to get lost. When we explore, we're going to need to find some way of finding our way back here." "Why should we come back?" someone asked. "Because it might take more than one night to find the way out. If it does, whoever is doing the exploring must be back in his cage by morning, otherwise Dr. Schultz will find out." Jenner was right. It took us about a week. What we did, after some more discussion, was to find some equipment. First, a large spool of thread in one of the cabinets, where some of us had seen Julie place it one day. Second, a screwdriver that was kept on a shelf near the electric equipment, because, as Jenner pointed out, there would probably be a screen over the end of the air shaft to keep out debris, and we might have to pry it loose. What we really needed was light for the ducts at night. Were completely dark, but there was none to be had, not even a box of matches. The thread and the screwdriver we hid in the ducts a few feet from the entrance. We could only hope that they would not be missed, or if that they were, we wouldn't be suspected. Justin and 2 others were chosen as the exploration party. One of the others was Arthur, whom we've met. They had a terrible time at first. Here was a maze to end all mazes, and in the dark they quickly lost their sense of direction. Still, they kept at it, night after night, exploring the networks of shafts that laced like a cubical spider web through the walls and ceilings of the building. They would tie the end of the thread to the grid in our laboratory and unroll it from the spool as they went. Time and time again they reached the end of the thread and had to come back. "It just isn't long enough," Justin would complain. "Every time I come to the end, I think if I could just go 10 feet farther." And finally, that's what he did. On the 7th night, just as the thread ran out, he and the other 2 reached a shaft that was wider than anything they had found before. And it seemed, as they walked along it, to be slanting gently upward. But the spool was empty. "You wait here," Justin said to the others. "I'm going to go just a little way farther. Hang on to the spool, and if I call back." They had tied the end of the thread around the spool so that they would not lose it in the dark. Justin had a hunch. The air coming through the shaft had a fresher smell where they were, and seemed to be blowing harder than the other shafts. Up ahead, he thought he could hear the whir of a machine running quietly, and there was a faint vibration in the metal under his feet. He went on. The shaft turned upward at a sharp angle, and then, straight ahead, he saw it, a patch of light-colored darkness, and then the pitch black around him, and in the middle of it, 3 stars twinkling. It was the open sky. Across the opening there was, as Jenner had predicted, a coarse screen of heavy wire. He ran toward it for a few seconds longer, and then stopped. The sound of the machine had grown suddenly louder, changing from a whir to a roar. It had, obviously, shifted speed. An automatic switch somewhere in the building had turned it from low to high, and the air blowing past Justin came on so hard it made him gasp. He braced his feet against the metal and held on. In a minute, as suddenly as it had roared, the machine returned to a whisper. He looked around and realized he was lucky to have stopped. By the dim light from the sky, he could see that he had reached a point where perhaps 24 air shafts came together like branches into the trunk of a tree. If he had gone a few steps farther, he would have never been able to distinguish which shaft was his. He turned in his tracks, and in a few minutes he rejoined his friends. We had a meeting that night, and Justin told all of us what he had found. He had left the thread anchored by the screwdriver to guide us out. Some were for leaving immediately, but it was late, and Jenner and I argued against it. We did not know how long it would take us to break through the screen at the end. If it should take more than an hour or 2, daylight would be upon us. We would then be able to risk returning back to the library, and would have to spend the day in the shaft, or try to get away by broad daylight. Dr. Schultz might even figure out how we had gone, and trap us up in the air shaft. Finally, reluctantly, everyone agreed to spend one more day in the laboratory, and leave early the next night. But it was a hard decision, with freedom so near and everyone thinking as I did. Suppose Dr. Schultz grew suspicious and put locks on our cages. Suppose someone found our new thread and pulled it out. It was unlikely, near the end, tied to a spool that was 6 feet up in the shaft, well hidden. Just the same, we were uneasy. Then, just as we were ending our meeting, a new complication arose. We had been standing in a rough circle on the floor of the laboratory, just outside the 2 screen doors that enclosed the mice cages. Now, from inside the cabinet came a voice. "Nicodemus?" It was clear, but a plaintive call, the voice of a mouse. We had almost forgotten the mice there, and I startled to hear that one of them knew my name. We all grew quiet. "Who is calling me?" I asked. "My name is Jonathan," said the voice. "We have been listening to your talk about going out. We would like to go too, but we cannot open our cages." As you can imagine, this caused a certain consternation, coming at the last minute. None of us knew much about the mice, except what we had heard Dr. Schultz dictate into his tape recorder. From that, we had learned that only the thing they had been getting from the same injections we were getting, and that the treatment had worked about as well on them as on us. They were sort of side experiments, without a control group. Justin was studying the cabinet. "Why not?" he said. "If we can get the doors open." Someone muttered, "They'll slow us down." "No," said the mouse Jonathan, "we will not. Only open our cages when you go, and we will make our own way. We won't even stay with you if you prefer." "How many are you?" I asked. "Only 8, and the cabinet doors are easy to open. There's a simple hook halfway up." But Justin and Arthur had already figured that one out. They climbed up the screen, unhooked the hook, and the doors swung open. "The cages open the same way as yours," said another mouse, "but we can't reach far enough to unlatch them." "All right," I said. "Tomorrow night, as soon as Dr. Schultz and the others leave, we'll open your cages, and you can follow the thread with us to get out. After that, you're on your own." "Agreed," said Jonathan, "and thank you." "And now," I said, "we should all get back to our cages. Justin, please hook the doors again." I had latched myself into my cage and was getting ready for sleep when I heard a scratching noise on the door, and there was Jenner climbing down from above. "Nicodemus," he said, "can I come in?" "Of course, but it's getting on toward morning." "I won't stay long." He unlatched the door and entered. "There's something we've got to decide." "I know," I said. "I've been thinking about it too." "When we do get out, where are we going to go?" I could not see Jenner's face in the dark of my cage, but I knew from his voice that he was worrying. I said, "At first I thought home, of course, but then I began remembering. I realized that won't work. We could find the way, I suppose, now that we can read, but if we did, what then? We couldn't find anyone we know." "And yet," Jenner said, "you know that's not the real point." "No? The real point is this. We don't know where to go because we don't know what we are. Do you want to go back to living in a sewer pipe and eating other people's garbage? Because that's what rats do. But the fact is, we aren't rats anymore. We're something Dr. Schultz has made, something new. Dr. Schultz says our intelligence has increased more than 1,000%. I suspect he's underestimated. I think we're probably as intelligent as he is, maybe more. I think we can read, and with a little practice, we'll be able to write too. I mean, to do both. I think we can learn to do anything we want. But where do we do it? Where does a group of civilized rats fit in?" "I don't know," he said. "I don't know," I said. "We're going to have to find out. It won't be easy, but even so, the first step must be to get out of here. We're lucky to have a chance, but it won't last. We're a jump ahead of Dr. Schultz. If he knew what we knew, he wouldn't leave us alone in here another night, and he's sure to find out." Alright, this is going to be a 2-part chapter because it's a little bit longer. So go ahead and click on the part 2 for this second half of chapter 18.